Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and this week's guest is Kim Sorrell, who is an author of two books, Love Is and Cry Until You Laugh. Two wonderful titles, I'm sure have a lot to offer. And she's the owner, or was the owner, of English Hills Country Club and Terrace, which was an amazing event site, golf course, and just a wonderful business that she had for many years. She's also involved in serving her community and others as executive director for Rays of Hope International, for Rays of Hope for Haiti and for Care Force International as well. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, now that we fumbled through that a few times, this is wonderful. So in this, progression that you've had throughout life, when did you first begin to notice that there was something more than what was going on in the outer world, that there was this drive, maybe inside or intuitive nature that you had that helped you on your sojourn?
It's so interesting because we all think that people think like us, right? Like, if you think a certain way, you're like, everybody thinks like that. Everybody's like that, right?
Yes, and that's kind of a standard thing, and yet,
right. And so it took me a while to realize not everybody thinks like me, but I think I've always been more in tune with more of what's going on than just the physical world and my physical being. And that's always been a part of my life. I just didn't realize that it wasn't a part of everybody's life, or not everybody recognized that part of their life.
Stepping into the Wayback Machine without Sherman and Peabody, what do you remember? What kind of things that were prompted or almost instantly brought up to you as we began to talk about this? Because for me, I know once the subject comes up, my mind starts going off on all kinds of tangents, right? And mini memories, if you will. What came up for you?
Yeah, I mean, just even in childhood, having dreams before things happened, and just feelings, feeling that there's so much more than what meets the eye, that there's so much beyond just what we see. And so those are the things, I guess.
Sure, I understand in broad terms. I was hoping for something a little more specific as to how in that moment or in that process, there was this coalescence of people, places, and things that brought your inner or your intuition of what was about to happen or what was coming, or, hey, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if this would happen? Because that happens too, right? It's like you can think those things and innocent, naively, and then sometimes they actually unfold in front of you. Did you have any of those kinds of experiences?
I did actually. When I was 8 years old, my parents started talking about putting a swimming pool in our yard, and for my brothers, it didn't seem real. My parents didn't think it was really going to happen, but I started telling people, we're going to get a swimming pool. We will have a swimming pool. And I remember the neighbor kids going and telling their parents, and then coming back to me saying, oh, my parents say you'll never have a swimming pool. Well, guess what? It wasn't too long and we had a swimming pool. And so, yeah, you can, your words have some power.
And that's a very simplistic kind of thing, but yet, and yet there's this process that took place that, initially was, and then all of a sudden, or over time, there was a change of that, and your desires were met.
Right. Yeah.
Now, as you got older and going through high school and early adult years, were there some inklings or even friends that you were able to share with and grow your understanding or explanation, or was this something that you still kind of kept to yourself for a while?
Yeah, probably kept to myself for a while, but then felt comfortable enough to open up to, to close friends. And I had a couple of dreams about a friend of mine, about her brother and about her dad,
Hmm.
things that people couldn't know. And that was pretty impactful
Kind of
and made
shocking
me
to them too, huh?
shocking to them, very shocking to them, and made me really think, wow, there's something more here. And so that's really when I began to think I can tell people they can think what they want about whatever
Mhm.
they want to think about, but I can.
Did you ever look for references in other things, in books and other people, in movies, TV shows, whatnot, to find some kind of reflection or confirmation, validation for what you were experiencing?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yes, or even things like putting it out there and saying, if this is real, then I need this to happen. And then it would happen. And I would ask for crazy things like, if this is real, in the next scene of this movie, the girl's gonna have a yellow shirt on, things like that. And then sure enough, she would come out with a yellow shirt on. A movie I'd never seen before. So yeah, kind of interesting stuff.
Oh, it is, and it's funny how even in movies, we can always say, well, the movie plots and things like that. Well, that doesn't necessarily give you the notion of what people are going to be wearing, the kinds of
Right.
colors of clothing and things like that. So it at least showed you that there was some additional connection that oftentimes, and I have to admit for me too, it creates a lot of awe because you don't really understand how it all works, and yet it does, and it's more of a process than the specific details that you've got to put in place for it. Does it seem that way to you?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I think you put it very well. It is a process, and um, everything unfolds in its time.
Do you recall, and do you now have a process of your own that you recognize so that when you experience, let's say, a moment of anxiety, that you are able to assuage that anxiety and move it into an anticipatory place of something about to happen that's cool rather than something about to happen that's, oh my God, right?
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. It's like people sometimes will say that your gut speaks louder than your heart. And I think that that can be true, that I get a feeling in my stomach and it's like, okay, something's going to happen, and it can kind of go one way or the other. And so,
Now, do
um,
have you ever looked into the science and other types of reflections that kind of bolster this experience? The reason I say that, and even ancient philosophies, and it's funny, and I've talked about this on many a show already, the indigenous philosophy of the three brain system, I find to be just exquisite. And it talks to the point that you just made, your gut. That's the first brain, intuition, your solar plexus. Now, science has shown that your gut is full of neurosensors. So, according to the native philosophy, this is where we connect with all the vibrations that are around us. And we know from quantum physics now that in quantum mechanics that everything's vibration. There is no solid matter at all. It just appears that way, right?
right,
And you don't want to still run into a wall or step out in front of a bus. And there's this notion that there's more, and that's all energy, and that our thoughts and feelings can have an influence on that. So with the gut, the first brain, that's where you're in touch with everything. And then the heart is the second brain. and it also has neurosensors around it as well. What it keys into, though, is a sense of resonance. And there's a gentleman named Matthias Demott who was had an interview with Tucker Carlson, of all people, and he was talking about what everybody really is seeking is empathic resonance, right?
Mhm.
I see that as loving and being loved,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
That's really what we're looking for. And so in this process of empathic resonance, your heart is able to determine where it's at. Well, once you determine where it's at, then the third brain kicks in and you make choices as to what to do.
That makes so much sense, for sure.
It
Yeah.
does. Now,
Yeah.
can we make that sense common in helping others to tune their own instrument? Because the body's an instrument, right? We haven't known how to tune it, let alone play in concert.
Right.
And now it's time we learned how to play in concert globally, because we're faced with, we need to learn how to work together in order to bring our planet and ourselves back into balance.
Mhm.
And it's possible. So in this, I have a sneaking suspicion that your book, Love Is, kind of goes in that direction. And I apologize, I haven't had a chance to read it. Am I correct?
Well, I questioned love after dealing with losing my husband. I just questioned the reality of love, the truth about love, what love really is. And I've always known that love is more than a feeling or an emotion,
Mhm.
but it seems to be undefined. And it seems to be this mystery, like a mystery surrounding what love really is, even with all the books written about it and songs written about it. And then there's Ed Sheeran and there's Nicholas Sparks and whoever that try to tell us what love is. And so I decided I would take a year and really research and figure it out for myself, figure out what love really is. And
That's awesome. That's
I did.
awesome. Now, and from tragedy comes triumph, unfortunately, and my condolences. How did that? I know it was shocking, because I know what it's like to lose a loved one, and you don't, you can think about it, you don't really know what goes on until you experience and the depths of that sense of being alone, right? It's excruciating at times. Now, coming out of that, though, because and this is the interesting thing about, when you go down, you have an equal rise.
Mhm.
And you seek to kind of balance that out so you don't have too many bumps, because those are really, the devastation of loss is not something you want to experience a lot. Um, so when you came out of that and you were finding about love, what were some of the key things that you found that then, at the more you drilled down into it, built upon themselves in new and amazing ways?
Yeah, so much. I discovered that what I'd been taught about love, what was demonstrated to me as love, what I think a lot of people believe is love is not necessarily love. And there are myths surrounding it, like things that we hear regularly, that are just sort of common statements made, like love is a two-way street, or, putting a number to it, it's 50-50, it's 100-100, whatever. And the reality is, love is not a feeling. It's not an emotion like fear or excitement. We don't live in fear. We don't live in excitement. Everything is not a scary movie, and everything
Right.
is not Disney World. And so we don't live in those things, but we do live in love, because love is something that you are. It's walking, talking, living, breathing. It's something that embodies you. And so when you recognize love for what it is, you also recognize it's not a two-way street. Love is on you 100%. 100%. You know, you bring that baby home from the hospital and you have total control. You decide when the baby eats, you decide when the baby takes a bath, you decide when the baby lays down for a nap. And then 6, 7 months later, all of the Tupperware is all over the kitchen floor and the pots and pans are banging everywhere. And you realize you've lost all control and you will never get it back again. So we have no control over anyone but ourselves, no control. So love is not a two-way street. If you give love to get love, that's a transaction. That's like me giving you money for a pair of jeans. And love is not a transaction. When you give love to get love, you're setting yourself up for heartache and disappointment because you have no control over what comes back to you. You have zero control, but you have all control over what you give.
Right. I totally agree with you. And to the point, what I perceive and what you were saying was that there's this place of exuding it. When you make that choice to have love as your center, this is where you are. And that doesn't mean you don't have rough moments and poor behaviors and things like that in the process, right? However, you recenter easily and you take responsibility. And when you screw up, you apologize and you get better.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, how was that process in those, were there certain things, as I mentioned before, that were there layers to that where the deeper you explored, the more visceral the experience became?
Yeah, interesting way to put it. So I use this 2,000-year-old poem that you hear at a lot of weddings. Love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast. And I kind of use that as a roadmap. I decided I would take one word a month and figure out, well, what is love that is patient? What does that even mean? What is love that is kind? And every single word ended up different than what I thought it was going to be, every single one, but then one played on the next. And so I started the year with looking for love that is patient. And every single month, it took me the entire month. It wasn't until the end of the month that something would happen. Some big thing would happen. And I go, oh, now I get it. Now
Kind
I
of
get
wrapped it all up in a nice package and said, oh, here's the gift.
Right, exactly. So I was figured out what love that is patient is, and then was trying to live it while figuring out love that is kind. And then, so each month then just builded to the next and the next. And
Now, did
so,
you ever realize, or let me ask you this, okay? Was there a belief system transitioning to an experience system as you progressed? Because
I
what I
think,
find, that the reason I ask that is that we often have these belief systems, as you mentioned, that how we perceive love to be. And then, and even in spirituality, there's these organized things and they're supposed to be this way and you're supposed to do these things. And the questions, the deep questions, aren't necessarily appreciated because not many of those purveyors of truth have the real answers. Why? Because they're an experience you have to have in order to gain them. Or converse the belief system into an experience system. Is that, and where could you go with that? And where have you taken that? Because this is what I hear you saying as you're developing this understanding, as you went after to experience exactly what it is and find out for yourself. How
yeah,
did that process, or did you recognize that you were shifting from a belief system to an experience system?
I absolutely. I mean, even starting with the very first month, I realized that the things that I thought I knew about love were different than what they really are. And so, we're all taught by our parents, our grandparents, our mentors, whoever's around us, our teachers, taught things about life in general, and every day brings us to today. And so what we know, what we understand, our understanding of things are based on where we've been. And so what I knew about love is what I was taught about it and what I knew about it from reading or, from learning from people. And then to take that and change it, total mind shift into it's not about what's in your head with love. It's about what you do with love. If you keep love in a jar and you never let it out, your life will not change at all. You can do that. You can live that life.
Well, many people would protect themselves like that and then wonder why, things don't happen.
Right, right. But when you open up that jar and you walk in that love, you let that love surround you and you walk in that love, everything changes. The way you see everything changes. The grace that you grant toward others, the mercy that you show, the understanding that people are where they're at and not everybody's at the same place. And the way I am today is different than the way I was in my 20s and in my 30s. There should be a book on how to get through your 20s, how to get through your 30s, like there is for adolescents and for babies, right? But
Right.
there's, I don't know.
How do you be an adult?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. How to be an adult then, right? Because
Yeah.
things change and you evolve.
Well, we're working on that with the organization and foundation and peace movement that I'm the executive director of now. We have uh, two principles: live and let live. Live is a moral principle. It means being a good human. The let live is don't be an aggressor. Let other people live their lives, right?
Mhm.
And so in the being a good human, we're working on unpacking what it means to be a good human and how do we embody that with each other. And there's all kinds there's myriad of conversations that can have across many different levels. And so we hope to be able to engage some of those things, kind of like what we're doing here now. Now, in the unpacking of this process, did you start from a place that we mentioned the feeling alone? When you lost your husband, did you have a sense of just falling into the void for a while? Is that
Well,
fair?
I had to figure out my life. I thought I knew what my life was going to bring, that we were going to be in our 90s sitting on rockers on the front porch drinking lemonade.
Sure.
And all of a sudden at 47 years old, everything took a turn. And so it was this new discovery, this new way to live. And I had to figure out what that would even look like and allow it to evolve as it did. And without being anxious about it, without, thinking, oh gosh, now I'm alone, now what, or whatever, or feeling sorry for myself or anything
Well,
else.
what I was hoping to kind of drill down into to see at least that moment and of feeling of empty, void of everything. It may not have lasted long, right? And from what you are saying, you were strong enough, you were prepared enough, not for the transition, you were prepared enough with your own self-awareness to get through it and get through it with a little more ease than had you not been sufficiently aware.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And I was diagnosed with cancer 4 months before my husband was. And so I was going through my cancer. My husband was 6 weeks from the time he was diagnosed to the time he passed away.
Ooh.
And so it was quick. So I was still dealing with my stuff too, which I think put me in a little bit different mental state than had my husband be the only thing I was dealing with at the time. And
Kind of like a double whammy, right? And one ended up not so good, and the other, obviously, here we are today. You were
right.
able to transcend that, at least for a time anyway, and congratulations for doing so.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, it was an interesting time. A time of not knowing, I think, more than anything, like whatever word to use, void or, what emptiness or whatever word to use, there's definitely a shift from feeling more whole to all of a sudden feeling disjointed
Mhm.
and incomplete somehow. And so, trying to bring the pieces back together. But I'll tell you, I really think something that is not talked about much, but I think is of great value is when I was physically ready to go back to work. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And had been running a nonprofit, and I also had businesses. I could go either direction and wasn't sure, and decided to take it slow. And I started as part-time
Oh, you
bookkeeper.
saw me perk up because that's the adage today. Go slow to go fast. If you're doing things with haste, you're going to miss stuff, and you're going to have to go back and fix the holes.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
so
when you
true.
slow down enough to be mindful, prepared, strategically, as well as intellectually and even spiritually, to be focused and centered and allow things, ask the questions and allow the answers to come. And they do, as you've experienced it, and many like us have, though we often think differently than the majority of people. So how do we bring that back around and share it with the public so that they too can rise into their own greater experience of joy and happiness?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think one thing is that there are things in life that we have more control over than we realize. There are things in life that we have no control over, and there are things in life that we have total control over.
Mhm.
So losing my husband, I wouldn't pick that, and I had no control over that, no
Mm-mm.
control over that. But what I do have total control of is how I live and how I want joy and happiness in my life. And I don't want to just stop in the grief and just hang there for the rest of
Right.
my life. But
Carry the baggies. There's no carry on this flight.
there's no carry
Mhm.
on. No, you come as you are with the clothes on your back and have at it and see what life brings you, and yourself allow yourself to choose happiness and joy. And
That's so scary for a lot of us, and the not knowing, and it's frightening because we're told that there's all these lurking things that can take advantage of you, and so on and so forth. And I say that lightly, and yet that's kind of the way it appears to be, all these false narratives,
mhm,
right, that we're being pummeled with constantly. And like you said, how do you were alluding to choice, right? That's one thing we have total control over.
mhm.
How did you first, I know you probably found that when you were younger. How did you bring that back into the process of living your life as you were discovering what love is?
Oh, well, I was in Haiti most of the time when I was working on figuring out what love is. And existing in Haiti is different than existing in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I live.
Oh, absolutely. Can we unpack that? Because I heard
Mhm.
a friend of mine the other day that spent some time in Haiti, and he said the difference there and in many other countries is we're family. If somebody's broken down on the side of the road, they're not there for long. In America, you drive right past them usually.
Yeah, that's one thing, I guess, that's true. The whole "it takes a village" sort of
Yeah,
thing, right?
yeah.
That some people want to ignore, but it's the reality that
Well,
we are all
because
in
we're
this together.
we're tied to the clock, to time, to making money. If I stop to help them, I'm going to be late for work.
Hmm. Right, right. But if you stop to help them, then your world shifts in a different way,
Mm,
and late to work doesn't matter anymore,
right.
right?
And it shouldn't if you're helping someone.
Right, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and
Always.
yeah, and so it was a unique place, a unique setting for sure, because it's survival for one thing there.
Now, was it the hurricane that brought you there? Relief
Earthquake actually.
or earthquake? Okay.
Yes, yeah. 2 weeks after I decided to take this part-time job as a bookkeeper at Rays of Hope International, there was an earthquake that killed 200,000 people in Haiti.
Okay.
And
There we
so
go.
within 2 weeks after that, I was in Haiti. And then I was in Haiti for at least part of every month for the next several years. And it was so healing. I believe service is a great healer. When you get out of yourself and you give to others,
Mhm.
and it's no longer all about you, there's such healing in that, and you can't outgive. You think you're giving, right? So there's some sacrifice that you're making because you're giving, but what you receive is so much greater than what you can ever give. That you can give more and you receive more, not because you give to receive, but because that's how it works.
Right. And it's often not tangible. It's intrinsic. It's that visceral experience of an elevated sense of togetherness. I don't want to
Mhm.
say an elevated sense of self, but however, that too, right? It's not independent though. It's more of a collective sense because of it. Let me, I speak that. Is that what you find?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, there certainly is individualness to it, but it is more collective. It is more realizing that we're in this together. People are people all over the world, none better than another, none worse than another.
Right. We got
And
different skill sets to apply to a situation, which again makes it a community effort, right?
right, exactly. And the different skill sets are great. Like we need that. We need
Necessary.
that combination of all of us. And it's with the combination of all of us, it's the working together that you really see things happen. And it's tough to live on $2 a day. And like so many people in Haiti do. That's not easy. You're surviving. You're not sure where your next meal is coming from.
Yeah.
That's a whole
Africa's the same way. I heard recently that, there's what, 5 billion people or something like that, and over 40% of them make less than $1 a day,
Mhm.
or
Right.
some, that may not be a correct, but it's that
You're pretty
kind of
close.
disparate,
Right.
right?
Right.
Now, how do we, could, therein is the issue with time and money, right? How do you see that being overcome, or a transition from that kind of activity, the time over money thing, to something where prosperity exists and the money's secondary? Do you see that happening?
I see it possible. I don't see it happening everywhere, but I see it as a possibility.
Well, usually happens, I would imagine that it happened in Haiti with the disaster relief. Would that be true?
To a certain extent, the world certainly showed up when the earthquake happened. 200,000 people. Think about it. We lost a couple thousand in the World Trade Center, and that was devastating. Of course, that was devastating.
Right.
But 200,000 people. That's a hard number to even wrap your
It
head
is.
around, right?
And not much of
And
it was televised.
no, right,
Right?
right,
So we couldn't have that, oh my gosh, kind of.
right. Yeah, exactly. The experience of it and to even try to grasp it. But the world showed up, but not all the money made it there. Even the money that the US said, yeah, we'll pledge, this much, whatever the numbers are in another country, we'll pledge this much. But everybody has strings attached to
Hmm.
money, unfortunately. And it's more like, well, we'll give you this much if you hire all American workers and you use all American equipment and you make sure that you import the majority of your rice so that our farmers are doing okay. And we hurt each other so much in the world. And there are so many people that make money out of poverty, make money off the backs of the poor. And that in itself is just a whole mind shift to realize that we do live in this excess. How often do you throw away a rotten tomato that you bought at the store that you didn't get around to eating, right? Or something goes stale. And how many people are there in the world that have no food? And how can there be such a division in the haves and the have-nots? And what can be done to bridge the gap a bit? And
what do you think some of those answers might be?
well, I think one thing is that for whatever reason, we don't want one t-shirt, we want 5 t-shirts. We don't want one pair of jeans, we want 8 pairs of jeans. And so those t-shirts might be made in a place like Haiti. And we can buy 5 of them because it's cheap to buy 5 of them. And we only want to pay so much for them. So we pay this low price for 5 of them, which means that the people that are working make very little. I think the minimum wage in Haiti is $7 a day. $7 a day for an 8 to 10 hour shift working in a factory. $7. Well, when a gallon of milk is $8, $9, $7 a day doesn't go very far. But it's because we want more. We want more. Whereas if we were to realize, well, shoot, if we paid more for one t-shirt, that would mean that the people that are making them could make more money. Do we really need as many t-shirts as we have? I mean, people are giving away clothes in bags to, the thrift store or whatever, right? We're sending bundles of clothes, of used clothing by the container loads, just bundle after bundle after bundle to places like Haiti, because we have way too many clothes here that have been given away that aren't used anymore, that we send them overseas to third world countries thinking that we're going to help them out over there. Well, do we need as much as we have? Where is the balance? And I think people don't realize that when you go to Walmart and you go, wow, great, 6 t-shirts for $20. Yeah, I'm in. What that really means. And that if instead you say, you know what, let's make sure that we're buying from a factory that the people are getting paid more money, whatever, and try to make a shift happen and try to change thinking, and then get 1 t-shirt and at a time instead of the 6.
Great idea. They're in the simple idea, very complex in how to change that around in order to, first of all, shift the mentality of folks to actually perceive things differently that way. Because most folks don't think. We are so inundated with consumerist propaganda. And it's kind of like, I'm reflecting on Howard Bloom's book, The Lucifer Principle. And in it, basically, he takes a scientific study on the history of how masses of people, populations, sometimes entire populations, were manipulated by a few who sang songs, who had false narratives, total lies that were repeated over and over again, and controlled the media streams, whether it be a town crier or the internet, and that people bought into it because of it. That was the only information they had. So they eventually just gave up and, right, okay, I'll acquiesce to that and believe it to be true. Well, what kind of world do we really want to live in? Do we want something like that? We first have to be aware that it's happening. Most of us aren't aware that that has happened.
Exactly. That's a big part of it, I think, is education. I think people are not aware. don't, that not everybody travels to third world countries. Not
No,
everybody goes and sees or thinks about, well, where's this made? How much are they making? What are the conditions?
no,
We
it's
don't
just how,
necessarily think about it.
how cheap can I get it, and is it good quality?
Right, right, right. And is it on sale on Black Friday?
Right.
Right. Yes.
Now, you mentioned education. There's another thing that in the educational system here, and you've progressed through it and got college education as well. Did you find that you were ever, throughout the whole process, assessed for your aptitude, your attitude, your proclivities, and or your natural skill set, and then supported in a passion that you had in putting those all together?
No. And I think part of the problem too is I think we know down deep what we want, what we're good at, what we should be doing, our contribution to the world should be, what our life should
Mhm.
look like. But we're told that we're dreaming too big, or we're told that we can't do that, that you can't have everything, that you shouldn't want that you shouldn't do that. And when we're told these things starting at a young age, and when we're told these things over and over, the real us kind of gets squished down.
The artist, the
And
musician, the painter,
exactly,
writer.
right, right, exactly.
No, fit the mold, go to school, learn the data, regurgitate it, get your grades,
Mhm,
find a
yeah,
job, get an education, find a job instead of creating something, right?
mhm,
Fit into the structure that we have. Now, in America, we're still in the Dewey system for educational. So this was created just after World War II in order to put people to work in factories. Now the world is a completely different place. What I find and this is what I think you find out when you get to know people from other cultures. Um, Several years ago, I met a woman and fell in love, twin flame kind of stuff. That sounds kind of out there to some people. However, it's what it is. And she's from St. Petersburg, Russia. So we've always known in America how disciplined and highly trained Russian athletes were, right? Right. And of course, we see them as an enemy. Let's take the enemy side out of it. Let's just look at how the systems are built and what's in them, educationally speaking. And their educational system, she told me at 5 years old, she got assessed, and it was either piano or gymnastics. And the assessment went to the point where they actually saw how far her fingers could stretch, what her musical aptitude was, whether she could sing, hold notes, recognize things, as well as being able to do things physically for gymnastics. Well, she chose piano because that was more a tender heart thing for her, I think. And so throughout her educational career, it was all about piano. Now, the well-roundedness of it, she got everything else too, but there was a specific theme or what's the word, stream of
yeah.
classes that were geared towards piano, and she went clear through the conservatory and graduated from there. World-class pianist
Mm.
as a result, and teacher. So and I say that because in contrast, our educational system never assesses a kid at the beginning except for what he knows in his math, reading, and science, arithmetics. Yeah, math, reading, and writing
Writing.
skills.
Mhm. Right, right. That's so true. That's such a good point. And, even in France, we had an exchange student from Paris one year, and in high school, you took either the engineering tract
That's
or you
or
took,
track. Thank you.
right? Yeah, yeah. Or you took the teaching tract. Like there were certain ones that by eighth grade, depending on what subjects you excel in and what your grades are like, and where it seems like you have greater ability, that determines where you're going to go to high school, what classes you'll take in high school, rather than just everybody taking the same classes
Mhm.
and the general ed and whatever. And certainly people evolve and change, but how nice to at least identify that there is something special about each person.
Absolutely. Why not? We're not a homogenous society. We're all
Right.
made up. The diversity is just huge, and the sooner we can learn to take advantage of that adversity, then we can really put all those various skill sets to work, right? And not necessarily for time and money. However, that will come too. What we're talking about, though, is to refocus in that essence of what love is and begin from there instead of what love isn't, and trying to push an agenda to discover what love is accordingly, right? The
Right. Right.
fulfillment of love, which never really happens.
Right. Or even a step farther, thinking that love isn't involved in certain things, that love has nothing to do with certain things. And that's not true. Love has everything to do with everything. And so, people will say sometimes, well, what does this have to do with my workplace? Or what does this have to do with what I want to do in life? Or what does this have to do with anything other than your relationship with your spouse or your friends? Well, it's got a lot to do with it.
Have
Got a
everything to
lot
do
to
with it. What
do.
was it that came out just recent? It's been a while. If you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. Right? Maybe not something wrong, but because that's kind of, we're getting out of that right, wrong, good, bad, white, black things, because those are polarizing things. And even with like we were talking earlier about complementary and non-complementary behaviors, right? Where
Mhm.
you show someone, and the non-complementary usually comes in transitioning an aggressive behavior into something more malleable and workable. As somebody that's in an aggressive state that's out of control, not much you can do except love them,
Mhm. Mhm.
and
Right.
that's what gets them to change.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the people in your life that you're drawn to, the people that you want to be around, the people you want to emulate, if you think about it, it's probably they're probably the ones showing the most love. They're probably the ones living in love more than others. They probably are more merciful. They're probably kinder because love is merciful and love is kind.
Hmm.
And they're non-judgmental because love doesn't judge. And love lets people be exactly who they believe they're created to be,
Right.
instead of trying to push who you think they should be
And
on
that's
them.
not a religious, there is no religious separation in that.
Right.
That's a ubiquitous experience.
Yeah. It's everybody everywhere.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
It reminds me that I had an experience in college, or yeah, in college as a teenager, that it was a demonstration. I prayed to know what truth was. I was willing to die for it if necessary. I was distraught. I was orphaned and adopted young, so I had these other questions going on in my head that most kids don't, because they don't have that absence of history in their lives. And so I questioned what truth was. I was willing to die for it if necessary. Well, the following week, I was meditating, and this voice I've been familiar with since a kid asked me if I was willing to die for what I believed in. And I paused for a moment. I thought, oh shit, what do I believe in? Right. And the first thing I thought of was Christ consciousness. Felt a little empty for some reason. And I didn't question it, but I moved on to cosmic consciousness. And that felt full. So I said yes. And then I exited my body, went into the light, into a sphere of points of light, and eventually came back into my body. There's a lot of stuff that happened during that time, but I don't want to digress in the conversation. What I learned from that was that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, into these forms. We're just not aware of it. We're all connected to that love source because it's the energy that permeates everything.
Mhm.
We've tried to define it and categorize it and structure it and behavioral analysis it, um, and where are we going to go eventually? Where do you think that this is going to take us? And with your discoveries, how do you see that fitting into others that are doing similar things? And are you all talking to each other?
We need to be talking to each other. That's for sure. I mean, really, I'm so passionate about the things that I learned about sharing the things that I learned about love, because I know the world would be a different place. I mean, it's life changing, it's world rocking
Mhm.
stuff that changes everything. When you can shift, first of all, recognize that maybe everything you were taught about love isn't love. Recognize that maybe there's a different definition than the one you know, and then be open to it, and then not just be open to it, but want to live it, want to live love for what it really is, and be love to yourself and be love to others. Everything changes. Your relationships change, your workplace changes, your home life changes, you're different at the grocery store, you're a different person in a traffic jam,
Mhm.
because you recognize that it's not about getting somewhere quickly.
Right. It's
It's
not
about
about the outer world at all.
right, it's not.
It's
It's
about
not.
the choices you make internally and how you respond in kindness to those experiences, right?
Right, exactly, exactly.
Now, do you see that that is something that as a population, um, being able to demonstrate it? Because we can talk about it all we want, right? And you and I and others like us, we have this understanding, this knowing, this faith, trust. It's even beyond faith. It's the knowing that because I'm doing these things, life is going to be better for me. We don't necessarily put the specific as to how, we just know that there's this sense of how it's going to be, which
Right.
is that knowing for whatever. Do you see this being able to take small groups of people, eventually larger groups of people, to a new living awareness and experience? And
I do.
how might we do that?
Yeah. I mean, I see it as a movement. I see it as it starts with the one, right? But then the one tells somebody, now there's two,
Mhm.
and then there's four, and then there's eight. And
Sounds kind of like live and let live, eh?
live and absolutely live and let live. I mean, I love live and let live, because both of those things are so important. Live, but know how to live. Learn more about, be open to how you should live. Be open to what that means, but also let live. Let people be who they believe they're created to be. We don't have to try to fix people. Let people be who they believe that they are, who they believe they're created to be, without any judgment or condemnation, or I'm better than, I'm smarter than, I'm greater than. No, no.
Right.
We're all the same. We're all the same. Let people
If we
be.
see how, people having challenges, we can, make suggestions as to, you might
If
want
they
to
want
try
to hear
this.
them,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
if they want to hear them, right? I
exactly.
mean, unsolicited advice isn't so great.
That's still being an aggressor.
It's being an aggressor. If somebody wants advice, recognize the circumstance, and are they really asking for advice, or are they just mad at their husband right now?
Right.
I mean, maybe they just want to vent for a second, and
Yeah.
if you agree with them and say, yes,
Yeah. And
your
that's it.
husband was a troll, you're right, you're right. Well, they're going to remember that the next day you called their husband a troll, and now they're back in love again.
Oh,
So what
sure.
are they going to think of you?
Right. Well, the interesting thing is that relationships do have, you've got to be able to be yourself in a relationship authentically, raw, and not take it personally,
Hmm.
right? Because the love is still in the foundation, when we started our relationship, I said it's faith, love, and trust in each other. That's the bottom line. If we ever lose that, then we got to, we feel like we're out of that, then we got to recenter and get back into that place, because that's where life is.
Hmm. Very good.
Now, that doesn't say we're not going to have bad days and we're not going to freak out, or that, emotions might get high during certain times of the month, right? And,
Right.
because there are, you're not in control during this.
Right.
Now, do you find that the masculine and feminine ways of dealing with those kinds of things, that kind of like John Gray stuff, or men are from Mars and
Mark,
women are from
women.
Venus, there's this different way that we handle things. How does that show up, and what, in your experience, have you been able to do to bridge those kinds of situations, to get men to think a little, to understand, first of all, how a little more how women think and feel and how they respond to things?
Yeah, well, I think
Guys
so
aren't
much of
set up
it.
to do that.
No, no, they're not. No, no, men can think of one thing at a time. I heard men and women described this way once, that women are a mall, and they can be looking at purses and dresses and sweaters and shoes and groceries, whatever store is there, whatever's around, they can shop for all of it at the same time. And men are lids, a store that sells one thing. They sell hats, that's all they sell. And that's how men focus, where women are, thinking
Mhm.
about different things all the time. And so I think so much of it comes down to communication. I had a moment early in my marriage where I thought, man, I'm gonna knock his socks off, I'm gonna clean our apartment and have candles on the dinner table, make his favorite. He loved lasagna, make lasagna for him, which, it takes a minute to do. And love German chocolate cake. Takes forever to make German chocolate cake from scratch, but I made a German chocolate cake, and I had the lights down low, and wearing something a little skimpy, a little sexy. And he walked in, and I'm thinking he's going to say, "Oh, baby, you look great." And, "Oh, wow, the apartment looks great." And then sit down to this meal and go, "Oh gosh, I can't believe you did this for me. It's wonderful. I love this. I love this." Well, he didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. It came in like it was any other day. How was your day? Well, how was your day? Didn't say a word about any of it. Like he didn't see any of it. And so by the time dessert was served, I was so angry. My blood was boiling because he didn't say anything. So I practically threw a piece of cake at him at the end of the meal. And he
And
said,
he was
"What?"
probably going, "Hey, what's going on? I don't
Exactly.
understand."
Exactly. He said, "What is wrong with you?" And I said, "What's wrong with me? It's not what's wrong with me. It's what's wrong with you. I did all this. I worked so hard. You've done nothing. You've not said a word about it." He said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. First of all, I don't read minds. I didn't know you expected me to say those things. Secondly, I haven't done anything wrong. It's your expectations that got you in trouble." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? My expectations?" And I went in our bedroom, slammed the door. My expectations, some nerve. Who does he think is my dad trying to teach me a lesson, or, whatever? And I thought, my expectations. And I went, my expectations. He was
Damn
spot
it, he
on.
was right.
Yeah, doggone it, he's right. But it's so true. We get wrapped up in our expectations to a point where, we think it's the man that has to bring romance to the marriage. Well, maybe the man doesn't need romance. My husband was left-handed. He said because he was left-handed, he wasn't good at compliments or romance. I don't know why he said that, but that's what he would say. But I wanted romance. I needed it.
Sure.
So I finally figured out it's okay for the woman to create it. So I created the romance, right? And so much of it just comes down to communication. So instead of waiting for them to say, "Man, you look good," say to them, "Don't I look hot tonight? I'm looking pretty good. Aren't I looking pretty good?" Like, it's okay. It's okay to say whatever it is that you want them to say. Let them know. Let them
Right.
know. Communicate, 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 right?
Now, and I will say that the mindfulness of the male aspect would be to, in my opinion, acknowledge, to be observant enough and aware enough to recognize all of this that had taken place, and at least acknowledge it, with a
Whether
thank
you're
you, or
right-handed
I
or
appreciate
left-handed.
everything that you did. And so, he was right in that it was your expectations, but he was also negligent in being present,
Sure. Sure.
right? Because
Yes.
in that love place is the acknowledgement.
Right. Right. But everybody's different that way.
Oh, absolutely. We all, however, some of us may not have it. When we are in relationship, it's not about us anymore. It's about being part of the other and what the other needs. Not that you're codependent to that, but you care enough to embrace that part of yourself in the other that offers that reflection. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but those are things that you learn about each other as well,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
That the needs of the other person. And so like with my husband, he did things for me all the time and never expected me to say, "Oh, honey, it's so nice that you did that," or "Wow, you did that. That was the sweetest thing. You really saved me time." Or he expected nothing.
Mhm.
He had no expectations of me ever saying anything. And if I did, it was fine. But if I didn't, it mattered not to him. So to him, those things didn't matter. The voicing the things didn't matter. It was doing the things that mattered. And so then he didn't
That's the
recognize that
example,
I
not the
needed to hear
words, the
it.
actions.
Right.
And as
Right.
kids, we hear all kinds of words from parents, others, and then we discern, okay, they say that, they're doing this, right?
Uh-huh.
Something's not matching up here.
Right. Right.
Is that the beginning of cognitive dissonance internally?
Yeah.
Perhaps for the kid, right? I believe this, I'm experiencing that, and you've got these two outer things that are in conflict. That could cause some, maybe not damage, but confusion
Right.
internally for kids for a while.
Yeah. I mean, simple things that just to relate it to, like, I got caught smoking in seventh grade. Well, my mom smoked a pack and a half a day. So
Right.
she's holding a cigarette saying, "You're in trouble. You were smoking." Here she's got a cigarette in her hand telling me I'm in trouble because I was smoking. And it's like, well, something just, I understood I wasn't old enough to smoke. I understood I should be in trouble for it. But how do you say it with a cigarette in your hand? It's different coming from someone who doesn't smoke, probably, right?
Right.
So, kind of to simplify sort of what you're saying is
Well, it puts that do
everybody's
as I say,
different.
not as I do into perspective in the maturation process, right? Where we set ages as to where you ought to be able to do these things of your own accord, by your own free will, rather than violate those prior to, whether it's drinking or sex or whatever. There's, going to war or enlisting. There's those age brackets that supposedly are where we ought to be in that. And they're arbitrary, right? Because kids sometimes are can handle themselves. They're much more mature at 13, 14-year-old than some people are at 50.
True. Right. Right. Just a number. Kind
Yeah.
of kind of like, the lines on the map are just lines that we created.
Just attempting to orient ourselves and what? Be in control.
Right. 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 Love that word.
Ah, it's yeah. Prefer Maxwell Smart in those cases. Um, working for control, right? And this arbitrary kind of nonsense stuff. Speaking of that, though, the arbitrary nonsense stuff, how do we get through our own stuff that keeps us from ascending into that new living awareness that you've outlined and is throughout your book?
I think some of it is that you have to let go. You have to let go. You have to let the past be in the past and you have to let go. Anytime that we hang on to whatever it is we're hanging on to, good or bad, or, the mess of the past or things that we were taught or whatever, when we hang on too tightly, then we're not going to change. We're not going to evolve. we're not going to grow. But when you
Understand
can,
that now, and I'm sure the audience does too. How? Do you have a process? Do you have something that where you have a mental trigger that gets, or a switch that gets flipped? Okay, now I got to run this. I have to run this pattern, or run this tape, or run this software program to move through this. What's the essence of that software that you use to move from one place to another?
yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to self-awareness, but how do you get there, right, is what you're saying.
Mhm.
And how do you recognize when you're putting up your own roadblocks and
Right.
stopping
What are the
yourself?
simple things that you've recognized you do to move through that? Because those are the keys. We talk, like I say, we talk about it forever, having the tools and then being able to apply them. We can have the tools and not do anything about it. And, whose fault is that?
Right.
What are
Right.
the tools that you found work for you?
Uh, the things that I found that work for me is expectations is a big thing. That it is a big thing. I mean,
Mhm.
certainly there are times in life when you can expect something. You work, you expect a paycheck. There are times that there are things that you expect. But when you uh, are working on love and you're working on yourself and you're working on loving more, anytime you realize that you're saying, oh my gosh, I just did that for them and they didn't even acknowledge me. Catch yourself and say, wait a minute, did I do it for the acknowledgement or did I do it because I love them? Did I do it out of love or did I do it out of I have something to gain from it? And catch yourself and catch yourself. And when you are engaged with somebody, when you're face to face with somebody and talking to them, if your mind starts to wander, bring it back, bring it back, bring it back, and be present in the moment and love fully, to be fully present in the moment and really listen to what somebody has to say.
Mhm.
And when you start to think about what you're going to say next, stop yourself and turn back to listening again. And just doing those simple things uh, will change the way you think about love, the way you live love.
Do you practice active listening? Because you just spoke of the first half of that, right? It is the intense listening to what the other person has to say without wanting to interfere or say
Yes.
their own stuff. The other half of that is reflecting back to the person what you just heard them say. So how is that? What is some of the things? Because this is where we I see the disconnect happening, where people know that that's a process to use, and yet they're uncomfortable in doing it because it feels almost fake at first. Right.
Well, maybe it does feel fake at first, but if you do it with authenticity, if you're doing it for the right reasons, eventually you'll be very comfortable in doing it,
Mhm.
and it'll become second nature instead of what is second nature to you now.
And you can ask those probing questions to know more, rather than, and then begin to correlate, or if there's an opportunity, because people love to share, and then there's a reciprocal side of that. So there's this sharing of conversations as to where the person that just shared an experience, then the other person can relate one of their experiences that has a similar flavor, and that kind of comes in that active listening process if it's done well.
Mhm.
And there's no, it's authentic. It's not, oh, I'm overthinking you, or I'm in competition with you, right? Oh,
Right.
is better than
For
yours,
nothing. Yes.
right?
Right.
And because that's what we often think when somebody starts talking about one of their experiences. Oh, you're just competing with what I just said. Well, there may be another thing, and there again, that's a misperception that isn't questioned. There's that silent judgment that takes place, and it's never spoken in the conversation. Instead of, well, when you're talking about this, it kind of felt like you were in competition with what I was just saying. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I felt. that's a place of vulnerability that folks just really have a hard time going to because it's an unknown, right? You're
Mhm.
questioning, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's why you're asking the questions.
Though, it comes back to choice.
Hmm.
It comes back to when you tell a story and somebody else tells a story that you can think one of two ways. You can think, wow, it's interesting to hear their perspective on their story. Or you can think, are they trying to one up me? Are they
Hmm.
trying to outdo my story? If you if you go there, you're going to be frustrated listening to that story.
All right.
And right? But if
Right.
instead you go, wow, well, they had a similar experience. Good for them.
Well,
They
aren't
can
we naturally tangential and we loose associate ad infinitum with just a word or a phrase? We're off someplace else. So why not acknowledge that in conversation and bring it into the conversation?
right, and let it happen. Let
Yeah.
it be part of the conversation. That's fine. If somebody wants to tell what happened to them that they think relates to what happened to you, that's fine.
Hmm.
Let it happen. That's okay.
And then there would be that necessary piece of agreement, I guess, or acknowledgement that this is how this conversation is unpacking itself. These are kind of the situations we might explore and how we're going to do things, kind of like I set this conversation with you up, right? Here's what we're going to do and kind of where we're going to have no idea where we're going to go or how we're going to get there. This is the general direction that we're going to head, and these are the parameters that we're going to use.
Mhm.
Right? Now, how often do we or do you think that that's something that's necessary to include in engagements in conversation prior to having them? And is it wanting to control things to a point where it's taking a little too far? Or are those kinds of parameters worth putting in place in order to have an elevated conversation?
If you do the opposite, if you do the opposite of what you're saying. So one thing would be to say, okay, let's agree right now that if we share stories, we swap stories back and forth, that it's not trying to one up each other. You're not trying to take my thunder, steal my thunder, whatever. As opposed to letting a conversation unfold and whatever the person says they say without you thinking negatively about it, without you assuming they're trying to one up you, without you thinking that that's even a possibility. Instead just listen to
Mhm.
what they have to say. That then you don't have to have that conversation. You can just let the conversation happen
Well, right.
and thinking the best instead of thinking the worst.
And having that conversation to the precursor um, usually doesn't happen, and in rare cases does it ever, because we launch into conversations. We just don't think about that kind of stuff because conversations happen, right? They're
Right.
free flowing, and yet it's what do we bring into that conversation? Who are we stepping into that conversation first of all? And how aware are we of ourselves that then we can see those kinds of things in others and be able to, micro expressions, body language, tone of voice, those kinds of things that let us know kind of where they are energetically, and check in with the gut, right? Because you're going to feel what's going on, and it's totally nonverbal. You're just observing and reflecting within yourself. That's a state of self-awareness that it would be wonderful to see being practiced in our schools, for instance, because this is training, right? We have to train ourselves. Well, when are we going to cop to the fact that we needed this training early in life? And, because our lives have gotten so messed up by adulthood that we sometimes don't know how to fix them, or can't for whatever reason. And we have all kinds of aberrant behaviors and um, destructive results.
Right. 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 That's where love comes in with the mercy. and the grace, and realizing that we haven't been trained and that we're all at different places. And I I have a woman in my life that my dad remarried after my mom died.
Hmm.
And she used to drive me crazy because no matter what you said, she had a better story. And no matter what, it always came back to her kids and her grandkids. Everything was just all about her kids, her grandkids. And so you couldn't ever just tell a story, it didn't ever matter. It didn't matter what you said, it would come back. And it used to really bother me. And then I realized, it shouldn't bother me. I believe now, I just believe she's limited. Like
All
some
she knows,
people,
that's how she can relate. So that's the only place she can
exactly,
share from.
exactly. That's all it is. That's all it is. So it's not a personal attack on anything that I
No,
have.
because their natural desire is to want to connect.
Right, right. And that's how she knows to connect. That's what she knows. So it took me a few years to get to that realization. But when I did,
Because where were you? You were in you. You weren't in her.
right,
And once you start
exactly.
trying to figure out who she is, then you were able to reflect on that and go, oh, wow, that's not where I was at. And I get it
Mhm.
now. But you had to step
Exactly.
out of yourself and ask the questions, well, why is this happening? Or where is she really at? What and it but it and gosh, easy for me to say. I'm jumping all over the place. When you're in that state of self-awareness, it's a gradual um, it's it's a leap of faith to begin with, and it's a gradual ascension of a staircase that leads you to being able to understand the world, and your worldview changes because you recognize, well, if these patterns are different, it's like chaos, right? We perceive chaos. Is it really chaos? Or is it just patterns that we don't recognize yet? So we believe that it's chaos because it's an unknown factor because we haven't learned how to work with it yet.
Mhm.
Harmony to me is managed chaos
Mhm. Yeah,
to others, right?
yeah.
There are patterns. It's math and science. It's rhythm, cycles, patterns, spirals, whatever you want to go to. It's built on a very solid model of energy and patterns and math and science. That's the way that the universe is. We're discovering that. How have you discovered in your own process of how that equates to a more comfortable place of being able to share both the inner and the outer reflection with that terminology that bridges worlds?
Well, I think it goes back to self-awareness, and why are you reacting the way that you are reacting to something being said?
Mhm.
Because there's so many times that I would hear something that was really benign, very innocent, but yet my mind would go someplace else because a certain word or something would trigger, right? Something from your past, and then you go there instead of where it actually is.
Right.
And so to kind of self-assess and go, why is my blood pressure going up? Is the hair on the back of my neck standing up? Why is this bothering me? Why is this bothering me? And most, if not all the time, it has nothing to do with the person and what they said.
Mhm.
It's
Now
not
that
their
sounds
fault.
pretty self-centered now, doesn't it? Well,
Right,
but it's not the ego, right?
right.
You're not projecting. What you're doing is you're wanting to tune in further. And to start
Mhm.
with you, who else do you have? Who's perceiving things? You are. Who's making the choices? You are. Whose mind are you experiencing? Yours.
Right, right, right. I mean, two people can be in the same traffic jam, and one guy in one car is honking his horn and screaming obscenities and yelling, and his blood pressure is rising, and his face is turning red, and he's out of control. And in the very next car is a guy going, I'm in a traffic jam, let me look
Turn
for
the
a good
radio up, start
podcast.
singing.
Exactly, exactly. I can get some work done while I'm sitting here, I can
Yeah,
listen to something good while I'm sitting here. And so it is about choice and how you handle things and not letting other people determine your choice, not giving people that power.
cool. Is there one specific thing that you can think of to offer the audience as to something they could practice on a moment-to-moment basis when they feel themselves triggered? I know you've given a several things that can we put it into succinct form?
Um, yes. Yeah. I would say the best thing that you can do is really listen with no assumptions, taking all labels away from whoever it is you're listening to and letting them be what their name is, period. Who they are,
Mhm.
not the things they do or different beliefs they have, but who they are, who they truly are. And then listen to the words and truly listen and not prejudging, not assuming anything, but take the words for what they are. Just take the words for what they are. And if you need clarification, ask, but just listen. Just listen. You find out that when you do that, instead of making assumptions, instead of having your rebuttal ready, instead of putting words into their mouth, when you just really listen to the words, there's a lot less conflict and you realize we're way more alike than we are different.
Mm, cool. What a wonderful ending, Kim, and I thank you so much for your time and the sharing of what you've gone through, the experiences you've had, and the real clarity that you've gained from it and shared with our audience. I really appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation was so fun and the time went by like nothing. So
I
thank you so
I
much.
warned you. It's like it goes by nothing flat because we're in the present moment. We're sharing the things that matter, right? These kind of conversations, I really hope the audience does listen to, can reflect on, and it makes up for the conversations they may not be able to have,
Mm, true.
and then experiment with what they learn in some way, and then come back for more.
Right. That's right. That's good.
Well, thanks so much again, Kim. It's been a wonderful time with you, and I will have your information below the video along with your books and links, and hopefully we'll get some response from that.
Great. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Kim. Thank you again. And namaste and in la catch, and thank you for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.